This revision video is for the Prelude by William Wordsworth. Now in this poem, Wordsworth describes his own childhood memory of ice skating on a frozen lake in the Lake District where he grew up during the winter season. Throughout the poem, he explores the beauty of nature and the freedom of childhood. Now, for this exam, you need to understand the context of this poem. First of all, it is important to note that this poem is autobiographical. That means that Wordsworth is writing about his own childhood memories of growing up in the countryside, a place called the Lake District. Due to the fact that he grew up in the countryside, a lot of his poems are inspired by nature. He began writing this poem in the 18th century, in 1798. This poem is in fact what we call an epic poem. It is a very, very long poem in its entirety. You're only given a short excerpt of it to study. And actually, because of this, it took him some years to write. He was one of what we call the Romantic poets, and they were a group of poets during the 18th century. They often wrote about the beauty of nature. They believed that nature was sublime. And by that, what we mean is something that takes us beyond the reality, something which is both awe-inspiring and terrifying at the same time. They were really inspired by nature. They felt that nature was a huge source of inspiration and imagination. And Wordsworth is one of those romantic poets, and that's how he felt and what he said about nature in his poetry. Some of the key themes in the Prelude by William Wordsworth. First of all, nature, particularly towards the end of the poem. The seasons, because he obviously talks about the winter season. He talks about childhood. He actually describes his own memories of growing up as a child in the Lake District and talks about the freedom of being a child. And also, obviously, memories as well for that reason. Now, you know that you need to write about the structure as well as the language. The first thing to note is that this poem is written in blank verse. Now, if you don't remember what blank verse is, it is unrhymed, so there's no rhyme to it. Iambic pentameter. And iambic pentameter is that rhythm da-dum, 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 da-dum. And that is what Wordsworth wrote his poem The Prelude in, blank verse, so it's no rhyme and it's iambic pentameter. One reason why he might have done this, first of all, iambic pentameter mimics the natural rhythm of speech, or is said to most mimic the natural rhythm of speech, which might add a sense of realism to the poem, particularly because it is an autobiographical poem, so he might have wanted to add that feeling of realism. It's also quite a rigid, unfluctuating structure. That means it's fixed, it doesn't change. So this structure could also imply the steady continuity of the seasons changing. As well as that, there is a lot of enjambment and caesuras as well, which is punctuation or pauses in the middle of a line. And that could suggest the freedom and the spontaneity of childhood, which is explored throughout the poem. Now, what I'm going to do now is speak through a couple of key quotations from this poem. The first one is this one. It is actually the first line of the excerpt that you have got. So it begins, and in the frosty season. Now, we've got that adjective, frosty, obviously from the offset, making it clear to us that this poem is about winter. When the sun was set. Now, that kind of first section, the fact that the sun was set, the sun had gone down, creates quite a melancholy atmosphere. We probably, from the first line, would imagine this to be quite a sad, sorrowful poem. However, that doesn't turn out to be the case. So despite the fact that it's set in the winter season, Wordsworth talks about it being a time of rapture. Now, rapture is actually a noun, and it means intense happiness. So he felt that this was a particular time in his life where he was really happy, really ecstatic, really elated. It's also what we call a biblical allusion. Now, if you don't know this, the rapture is an image from the Bible. Many Christians believed that believes that at some point there will be a judgment day where all of the Christian believers rise up to heaven. And that's what a rapture is. So as well as being an intensely happy experience for Wordsworth, he also seems to be implying that it was almost a heavenly experience for him, ice skating on this frozen lake with his friends in the countryside as a young child. He felt that it was a heavenly experience. Hence why he uses that noun and also metaphor, rapture. Okay, next quotation that we're going to look at is, "So through the darkness and the cold we flew." Now, these two nouns, the darkness, the cold, again, they both give us that sense that Wordsworth is trying to create quite a melancholy, sorrowful atmosphere. However, he juxtaposes that with his language, "we flew." It's a metaphor because obviously he's not really flying. What he's referring to is how quickly they were ice skating along the frozen lake. Okay, so using that metaphor, "we flew," suggests that they were going really quick. It implies freedom. It implies enjoyment. So even though it is this dark and cold season, they are flying. They are happy. They are elated. Once Wordsworth has spoken in detail about his experience as a child, once he's described the children playing on the frozen lake, he goes on to kind of pan out a little bit and focus on nature surrounding them instead. So first of all, he talks about the tumult. Now by that he means the loud noise of the children. But into this tumult is sent an alien sound of melancholy. Now by an alien sound, he means an unfamiliar sound. And melancholy means sadness. So into the kind of tumult, the loud enjoyment of the children, from the hills, from nature, comes an unfamiliar sound of melancholy. So it creates a slightly more mystical, mysterious, ambiguous atmosphere here. And interestingly, Wordsworth says that it is not unnoticed by the people. This feeling of melancholy coming from nature, because it is so big, it's so terrifying, it looks so lonely, especially during the winter seasons. It's not unnoticed by the people, which suggests that nature impacts upon humanity. Okay, the final quotation that I'm going to look at is actually the final quotation of your excerpt. "The orange sky of evening died away." Now this adjective, orange, it creates a sense of beauty, okay, the orange sky. It also suggests that obviously it is sunset, but it creates this beautiful picturesque image of nature, which is one thing that the Romantic poets did try to create through their poetry. However, this idea of beauty is then juxtaposed with this verb, died. It's quite an unhappy image, unhappy lexis, has negative connotations. Now obviously it is a negative image for the poet because evening dying away, basically nighttime coming, means that this experience of ice skating surrounded by nature with his friends ends. So the excerpt that you have of this poem actually ends on quite a melancholy note of the sky, the orange sky fading away and leaving nighttime. Okay, so last but not least, I want to look at the links between some other poems. Now, first of all, this poem contrasts well with London because you can look at setting. So you've got London, which is set in the city, versus the Prelude, which is set in the countryside, and you could compare and contrast the descriptions of the city with the descriptions of the Prelude, where the countryside is described. You've also got the poem To Autumn, which is almost a celebration of the autumn season. Now, obviously, this poem, our poem, the Prelude, is a celebration of the winter season. So you could look at those two poems quite clearly. Both poets, Into Autumn and the Prelude, are romantic poets, which might make them two quite nice poems to compare and contrast. Finally, you've got Afternoons. Now, Afternoons explores the idea of mothers and compares that to their children. So it looks at the lives of children as well. And for that reason, you could compare Afternoons and the presentation of childhood in Afternoons with the presentation of childhood in the Prelude by William Wordsworth.